If the moon is a reflector of the sun's light, she could not radiate or throw down upon the earth any other light than such as she first receives from the sun. No difference could exist in the quality of character of the light, and it could not possibly differ in any other respect than that of intensity or quantity. It has been asserted in opposition to the above that the moon might absorb some of the rays of light from the sun and reflect only the remaining rays. To this, it is replied that absorption means speedy saturation. A piece of blotted paper, or a lump of hard sugar, or a sponge, when brought into contact with any fluid or gaseous substance, would only absorb for a short time. It would quickly become saturated, filled to repletion, and from that moment would cease to absorb, and ever afterwards could only reflect or throw back whatever was projected upon it. So the moon, if an object without light of her own, might at the beginning of her existence absorb the sun's rays, and fixing some might return the others, but as already shown, she could only absorb to saturation, which would occur in a very short time, and from this point of saturation to the present moment, she could only have been other than a reflector too, of all which she receives. We have then, in order to know whether the moon is a reflector, merely to ascertain whether the light which we receive from her is or is not the same in character as that received from the sun. And due to the lack of time we have left in this broadcast, I'm not going to continue, probably to your great joy and my terrible reading of this. But this author goes on to describe the many differences in the type of light that comes from the sun and the type of light that comes from the moon. And as I said earlier, this author is quite thorough in his explanations and experiments. And he goes on to describe various ancient cultures that talk about a dark object that is also part of our solar system. Skipping ahead here, page 114, talking about the moon being self-illuminating. We have seen that during a lunar eclipse, the moon's self-luminous surface is covered by a semi-transparent something, that this something is a definite mass because it has a distinct and circular outline, is seen during its first and last contact with the moon. As a solar eclipse occurs from the moon passing before the sun, so from the evidence above collected, it is evident that a lunar eclipse arises from a similar cause. A body, semi-transparent and well-defined, passes before the moon, or between the moon's surface and the observer on the surface of the earth. That many such bodies exist in the firmament is almost a matter of certainty, and that one such as that which eclipses the moon exists at no great distance above the surface is a matter admitted by many of the leading astronomers of the day, that being the late 1800s. In the report of the Council of the Royal Astronomical Society for June 1850, it is said, quote, "We may well doubt whether that body which we call the moon is the only satellite of the earth," end quote. In the report of the Academy of Sciences of October 12, 1846, and again for August 1847, the director of one of the French observatories gives a number of observations and calculations which have led him to conclude that, quote, "There is at least one non-luminous body of considerable magnitude which is attached as a satellite to this earth," end quote. Sir John Herschel admits that, quote, "invisible moons exist in the firmament," end quote. That's from Herschel's Astronomy, page 521 and 616. Sir John Lubbock is of the same opinion and gives rules and formula for calculating their distances, periods, etc. At the meeting of the British Association of the Advancement of Science in 1850, the president stated that, quote, "The opinion was gaining ground that many of the fixed stars were accompanied by companions emitting no light," end quote. Quote, "The changeable stars which disappear for a time or are eclipsed have been supposed to have very large opaque bodies revolving about or near to them so as to obscure them when they come in conjunction with us," end quote. That's from the Encyclopedia Londinensis. Fixed stars is the category. Another quote here. Bessel, the greatest astronomer of our time, in a letter to myself in July 1844, said, I do indeed continue in the belief that Procyon and Sirius are both true double stars, each consisting of one visible and one invisible star. A laborious inquiry just completed by Peters at Königsberg and a similar one by Schubert, the calculator employed on the North American Nautical Almanac, support Bessel. That's from a work called Physical Description of the Heavens by Humboldt, page 183, copyright 1867. Another quote. The belief in the existence of non-luminous stars was prevalent in Grecian antiquity and especially in the early times of Christianity. It was assumed that among the fiery stars which are nourished by vapors, there move other earthly bodies which remain invisible to us. That's from Origen. Another one by Diogenes of Apollonica. Stars that are invisible and consequently have no name move in space together with those that are visible. Lambert, in his cosmological letters, admits the existence of, quote, dark cosmological bodies of great size. Now, if all this is true, this may solve the problem of what do we do with things like this Planet X Nibiru thing, which even in the spinning heliocentric globe model is reckoned to be a dark planetary body. So, and of course, scientists are all talking about dark matter and everything today, even in that standard model. So if people can talk about dark bodies in the spinning heliocentric globe expanding universe model, then why couldn't we apply the same thing to the flat Earth enclosed model? What if there are dark bodies within the dome? Robotham continues. We have now seen that the existence of dark bodies revolving about the luminous objects in the firmament has been admitted by practical observers from the earliest ages, and that in our own day such a mass of evidence has accumulated on the subject that astronomers are compelled to admit that not only dark bodies, which occasionally obscure the luminous stars when in conjunction, but that cosmological bodies of large size exist, and that, quote, one at least is attached as a satellite to this Earth, end quote. It is this dark or, quote, non-luminous satellite, end quote, which when in conjunction or in line with the moon and an observer on Earth is the immediate cause of a lunar eclipse. That's page 116 of Zetetic Astronomy by Dr. Samuel Robotham. And actually, as I continued to search this out, I found some interesting things within the Hindu religion. Now, look, I'm not going to say I'm going to put any authority on Hindu scriptures over biblical scriptures. I'm not taking my doctrine from the Hindus. But, you know, I think if we're going to be true Zetetic explorers or people who are on a genuine quest for truth, doing investigation by observation and inquiry, then we have to look at the available evidence. Now, the Bible doesn't tell us how eclipses are caused, so we don't get any information, you know, at least not that I'm aware of. Somebody's free to message me and tell me otherwise, but as far as I know, the Bible doesn't tell you how a solar or lunar eclipse takes place, like the mechanics of it, how it happens. So, and if these astronomers, at least from the 1800s and from antiquity, are admitting that there are dark objects in the sky, then, you know, we would expect it to show up in the literature of other people around the world. And indeed we do. The Hindus have these interesting characters called Rahu and Ketu in their mythology. And I got this website here when I looked it up. Let us now take a closer look at the mythical origin of the dark demon Rahu. In old Indian tales, Rahu storms across the heavens in a dark chariot drawn by 8 black horses as swift as thought itself. He pursues the orbs of sun and moon, snapping at their heels with his huge jaws. In another version of the myth, however, only Rahu's head still exists floating above the firmament, having been severed by Indra, the sun god, as the dark demon tried to steal the vital drink of the gods. Nonetheless, this decapitation did not hinder him from continuing to fly through the heavens and swallowing the sun and moon. It is just that these now passed through him unharmed and soon reappeared, freed from the lower end of his throat. In astronomical terms, this process signifies the end of the solar or lunar eclipse, respectively. So basically, they have this idea of this floating head of a god out there that tries to swallow up the sun and moon, but obviously, because it's decapitated, the sun and moon just exit the other side. So that would give the illusion that we see in the sky from a mythological perspective of this rounded object coming up on the moon and then the moon going through it and then coming out the other end. So you can kind of see where they get that idea from. And you can look them up on Wikipedia or elsewhere online. This is Rahu right here and Ketu right here. So, if nothing else, here's some things to think about. Okay. Again, I'm just exploring this stuff. I'm trying to put pieces together, see what could be, what might be other ways to look at things that we've been taught our whole life. But I just want to say that the issue of the lunar eclipse is sort of falling apart as it pertains to being a solid argument that would keep me tied to the globe model. In other words, I'm finding evidence both scientifically, at least from the 1800s, people writing in various scientific journals, as well as historical accounts of the ancients talking about a dark body that could be responsible for causing the moon to go into lunar eclipse. And frankly, the whole idea of the moon going into a blood red lunar eclipse while the sun is still up, in my mind, obliterates the whole idea that the lunar eclipse is due to the sun, earth, and moon being in a line and the moon in the shadow of the earth. It doesn't work.
Hi guys, it's Flatwater back again. He's absolutely right. It doesn't work uh, in the heliocentric model. Um, what you're looking at here is the dark orbs, Rahu. Uh, this flight was filmed on a flight near the North Pole. If you rewind and look at where they were going through, they started near the North Pole and were flying around the North Pole. So what you would have to imagine is these orbs being, wandering stars, dark, translucent, opaque wandering stars in the sky that as they rotate in the clockwork of the sky, they come back around on each other and they every 18 years is what some of the paperwork says that they some of the literature says that they that's every 18 years is how long the cycle is for them to come back around. So what you have to picture is that they're in the clockwork of the sky, of the vaulted sky, and that just like the sun and the moon and the other planets rotate on their projected paths, so do these things, and that they have a regular pattern which can repeat every 18 years. Um, and as you heard Rob Skiba talking about, you heard him saying that those paths and movements are projected and can be laid out and have been laid out. I spoke earlier in another video about comets and how the vaulted sky turns at a regular rate, and that's why comets come back at the same time of the year every year. Well, this is a similar phenomenon or similar thing in that they come back at regular intervals and that they can be calculated. I also talked about radar astronomy and radio astronomy and how you can't beam outside of the vaulted dome and take readings on objects that are supposedly outside of the vaulted dome, but you may, and I think that they in fact do, use radio and radar astronomy to track these types of objects, these dark orbs, because you can imagine that if these are near the North Pole and they're rotating around up in the sky, that forces in the military or other forces would want to, well, and for any particular reason, that they might want to track these objects and observe them for different purposes. Anyways, I just thought